Welcome to Crossing the Line, the podcast from NC Sesame, where we examine educator sexual misconduct, survivor stories, and the systems that can either protect children or fail them. I'm your host, Joelle Casteixspeaks. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Donna Bulatowicz, survivor, educator, researcher, and advocate. Donna's story challenges many of the assumptions people hold about child sexual abuse. As an elementary school student, she was abused by a female teacher, an experience that was misunderstood, minimized, and overlooked in ways that are all too common. In this conversation, we'll explore Donna's personal journey, the unique dynamics of female-on-female abuse, why society often struggles to recognize female perpetrators, and what educators, parents, and policymakers need to understand if we're serious about protecting children. This is an important conversation and one that may challenge some long-held myths. So let's get started. Welcome to the show, Donna.
Thank you so much, Joelle.
I'm so glad you're here. And, I really just wanted to dive right in because your story is so powerful and I think is one that is unheard by, many survivors. And I think it will really impact a lot of people. So can you tell us your story and how you got here?
I grew up in Billings, Montana, in a poor neighborhood, and when I was in elementary school, in upper elementary school, my best friend moved away right before school started. She moved 300 miles away, and all of the teachers in upper elementary were new that year, including my teacher. And she started grooming me right away. Like the first day of school, she was putting her hand over mine and telling me I was the prettiest little girl she'd ever seen. When I moved my hand away, she put her hand elsewhere. And just constantly being what I called pushy like that. That year was an awful year. I had wanted to be a teacher, and then that took that away from me for a while. I told on her the following school year when it occurred to me that she could be doing that to someone else. Then another little girl could be harmed. So I told my school counselor, who did everything right. She asked me to tell her more when I had said something that she wasn't quite sure about. I said, my teacher, that teacher had made me uneasy. And she's like, well, can you tell me more about that? And so I did, and eventually told her what was happening. And then I started crying and apologizing because my teacher had threatened me. If I ever told, she said she would ruin my life. She said she would kill my dogs. She said my parents and other family would abandon me. Nobody would love me. Nobody would want me. And I believed her, because she seemed all powerful to me. But the school counselor, comforted me, told me what she needed to do, and let me choose whether I wanted to go back to class, whether I wanted to stay in the room, what I needed. And I stayed in the room until I was done crying. My dad took me to the police station later that day to report to the police. My dad was a social worker. He is actually one of the two people who started the sexual abuse task force in Yellowstone County. And so he knew the officers. He thought they were going to follow the interview protocol and do everything right by me. They did not. They told me a woman wouldn't molest a girl, especially her. They said she had a husband, she wasn't a dyke, and yes, they used that term. She had sons. There was no way it could have happened. She was a pillar of the community. They did not ask me the questions they should have asked. They should have asked, for instance, if she had identifying marks on her body, which she did. And if I had known they should have asked that, I would have told them. But because they didn't ask, I didn't say it. I didn't offer it. Needless to say, she ended up getting away with the abuse. The school district tenured her after I told on her and moved her to another school with a younger grade level and a school that had a lot more places she could be alone with the child. She and her enablers retaliated against me. Some of my teachers from that point on were some of her enablers. I lost awards and honors I'd won. I lost opportunities for scholarships. I had a teacher call me a liar in front of the class. Just basically, school was, but hell for me because of all that. However, also all of that made me really determined to become a teacher because I didn't want anyone to go through what I did. I wanted to be the teacher I needed. I wanted to be a teacher like my amazing first grade teacher, Mrs. Kinn's father. I wanted to help children and to protect children. And so I did. I became a teacher, and then I became a teacher educator.
So I'm going to go back a little bit and rewind because there's a lot to unpack there.
Mhm.
So when you said upper elementary, what age are we talking about for you? How
We're
old were
talking
you?
about 4th through 6th grade. I am not being specific because who she is not important to the
Yeah.
story right now. She's dead. She's not hurting any more kids. So I try and not specify which grade, but that's upper elementary.
But I think that what is important is that you were a little girl and she was an adult woman and it happened. And it wasn't
Yes.
there's so many ways that people could try to minimize this. This is criminal activity that should have been pursued and
Yes.
it wasn't. What years like general decade time. I don't mean to age you, but
L- Late 80s, early 90s.
okay. So so you said you went on to become a teacher educator
Yes.
and your research now focuses on this type of abuse and how pernicious and terrible it is. Can you tell us a
Yes.
little bit about that?
Um, for my research, first of all, when I started healing about 4 years ago, I started looking at research and going, okay, there's so many gaps. For example, I started looking at studies that were done about gender, how gender impacts the way people view sexual abuse, whether it's the gender of the abuser, whether it's the gender of the victim. And I noticed that in most of those studies, they didn't even mention in the delimitations or anything that women can abuse girls. Usually the study would focus on um, a man abusing a girl or a woman abusing a boy, and sometimes a man abusing a boy. But it's like it didn't even enter their head that a woman could abuse a girl. And that was most of the studies. So right now I am doing a meta-analysis of the different studies to point out the gaps there so that hopefully they start being filled. Because if there isn't research about something, then fewer people know about it, less is done about it, which leaves people like my abuser get away with it more easily. She got away with it because she was a woman who abused a girl. And I want that to stop. I don't want any other survivors feeling as alone as I did. I mean, I was a kid hunting frantically in the public library for any book that could tell me that I wasn't alone. And any book that I could find about sexual abuse told me the opposite. No one like me was included. And that is heartbreaking for a child who is already feeling alone because the police didn't believe her. And then some teachers chose not to. And I mean, my abuser passed around a paper every year that said that I was crazy, that I made up allegations, etc. I know because the paper was confiscated by, and I don't remember what her role was, if she was a dean, assistant principal, something. And she told my dad about that and just to, hey, heads up, this is going on. And then my 12th grade English teacher, he confiscated the paper and he told me that he told me that he had done that. He told me if anybody was treating me differently to let him know and he would take care of it. I didn't trust him though, because I didn't trust any teachers at that point. But I think that if some of them had really stopped to think, why would an adult go after a child this hard? Even if they're innocent, why would an adult go after a child this hard? It's to try to cover up what they had done.
I'm astounded by that because it's like, oh, she passed a paper on, but we're talking 6 years later, and even when you were a little kid, she was targeting you. I mean, she doth protest too much. That is so horrifically abusive in so many ways. I mean, I've talked to other survivors, and I've in my own experience, I've found that this treatment afterwards sometimes is worse than the abuse. How have you been able to come through that? What was your healing journey like?
Well, for a long time, I just pushed it aside because it was too much for me. I was lucky in the fact that my family believed me. My parents immediately said, "I am so sorry that she did that. I'm so sorry we didn't see it." They got me into therapy with the person who is supposed to be the best child psychologist for childhood sexual abuse. She did some good things, but she also told me that I wasn't a virgin anymore, so nobody would want me. She also told me that I was completely healed and would never need therapy again. So when I started, struggling with it, I just pushed it away because I was like, I'm supposed to be healed. I didn't want to be failing. I had the perfectionistic thing that a lot of survivors do. And so I didn't even realize how much I needed to heal until 4 years ago when a lot of things happened around the same time. And including, I started having regular dreams about my abuser, which hadn't happened for a long time since I was like in high school, was the last time I had that. And also had a lot of friends bringing her name up out of nowhere. And they either they knew she had been my teacher because I had one of my friends had asked me, "Oh, you were at Newman Elementary during this time, and she was the teacher there. Did you know her?" And so, no reason to lie, I said yes. Um, but people kept bringing her up over and over and over, and it was really upsetting me. And then finally, was like, you know what? I probably still need to heal. So that's when I got on the journey. And that's when I realized how many gaps there still are in research about this, how few stories are being told, and that is more common than many people realize. For example, on some surveys of survivors, 40% of survivors had a woman as one of or the only abuser. And in Billy Joe Grant's research on news articles that's on Sesame's website, they found that of the news articles from 2014 to I believe 2026, it was 25% of the articles about teacher sexual abuse was a woman teacher who had abused somebody. So this is more common than people realize. It's harder to come forward if you think it's never happened to anyone else.
So when the teacher's name was coming up, was this because she was accused by other students, or because I'm thinking my fourth grade teacher or fifth grade teacher or sixth grade, her name doesn't come up. Their names don't come up.
People were bringing her name up because of something that had happened that was similar to how my abuser died, and they had known her. And so that was one of the reasons. Another reason was because there was some stuff in the news about high-profile people in sexual abuse. And one of my friends said that false accusations can really harm people. And I agreed, yes, they do, but they're very rare. And he said that his friend, and named my abuser, had some little girls falsely accuse her of sexual abuse. And so she was eventually pushed out of the school district. And so, just things like that. And I pointed out that, first of all, children rarely lie about sexual abuse. The statistics on how many children lie include all the recantations, and kids recant because they're terrified, because they don't want to go to court, because someone's pressuring them, because they're afraid of what will happen to the abuser, because most kids know their abuser and care about their abuser.
Love their abuser, yeah.
Exactly. My abuser groomed me to love her. And so I pointed that out, and I also said if she taught for 11 years in the school district and she had multiple little girls accusing her of something, then it was likely she did it. As soon as she was pushed out of the district, she got hired at the local university to teach in the teacher prep program. And I didn't know that until later. But yeah, they hired her for that. So she taught in field experience courses. So she still was able to go into elementary schools to observe her students who were doing field experiences there. And there were still kids on campus. And so she still was allowed around children. But the thing that I found interesting is how many people who worked in that educator prep program heard that she had been kicked out because girls accused her of inappropriate behavior. And yet she still was teaching there.
I'm flummoxed, but I'm not surprised because this is one of like 8 cases I've talked about in the past 2 weeks about abusers who've just punted up to the university system because either the university system A doesn't care, or B doesn't think it's a problem, or C doesn't do the kind of checks, or D doesn't find out until 2 years after they're tenured, or all kinds of stuff. So I want to talk about female abusers for a minute. I come from the Catholic school tradition and clergy sexual abuse, and nun abusers were a big faction of the survivors movement. But we found that the survivors of nun abuse were super marginalized, not by the other survivors, but by therapists and advocates and everything else. And they fell into the same trap that we hear all the time when it comes to female abusers with boys, saying, oh, well, she broke you in, you were so lucky, hot for teacher, and all that crap. There is, in the nun survivor movement, there were women who were survivors who came forward and said they were survivors of physical abuse. But I don't recall, outside of the horrific abuse at many of the Indian schools, like in South Dakota, there being women who felt brave enough to come forward to say they were sexually abused by the nuns. Because, it was hard enough for the boys to be believed. And I think that, that's going to change, first of all, because many of these nuns have now died and things like that, so people feel safer coming forward. But when we look at female abusers and what are you seeing as the trends in the past 8 or 10 years? Because I'm seeing a sea change, but you're the expert.
I'm seeing a change. However, still too many times, if you look at, I know, never read the comments, but if you look at comments on articles about women abusers, if they've abused a boy, a lot of men are commenting, oh, he's so lucky. Oh, I wish this had happened to me. When no, he's not. Poor child was sexually abused. There's nothing lucky about that. And gross comments when there are other gross comments when it's a woman who abuses a girl. There are lots of comments about, oh, girl on girl action. Oh, how lucky this girl was. Oh, what could a woman really do anyway to a girl? Basically dismissing all of it. I've seen, even in just the past 4 years in my healing journey, I have seen some of that starting to change. I have seen a little bit more acknowledgement that women can and do abuse girls. For example, a recent study by Elizabeth Juglick, it focuses on survivors, women survivors who had been sexually abused by women when they were little. And that's was a lot more rare. It's now becoming, still lots of gaps, but it's now becoming a little more talked about, a little more recognized. But there are still places and people who totally ignore the fact that it's even possible for a woman to molest a girl. For instance, a book written for survivors mentions that men can abuse girls and boys and women can abuse boys. That's it. And other things where it's, for instance, I was looking at some resources on a very well-known website for survivors, and the only section about female abusers, it was just about them abusing boys. And I gave some resources to the person who did add them, thankfully. But then when she said that she had a podcast, and she said that she interviewed survivors of all types of abuse. So I was like, oh my gosh, I missed the one where you interviewed a woman who had been abused by a woman. She sent me a link to the resources that I provided her as evidence that she had that. She had not interviewed anyone, and I don't think it really occurred to her that she had left us out until I said something. And I'm finding that is rather common. However, most of the people where I've said, hey, I think you accidentally left this group of survivors out, they're like, oh my goodness, what can you help me fill that gap in? I didn't mean to do that. But I think because for so long it was basically taboo to talk about, people just don't realize it can occur. They have this huge, for lack of a better term, a blind spot. And if our brains don't think something can occur, we gloss over evidence that it does occur. We all, our brains can be kind of lazy. It tries to follow well-worn pathways. And if it's a new pathway, if it produces really uncomfortable cognitive dissonance, a lot of times people are like, oh no, I don't want to hear that. And they pass over the story. They gloss over the headline where a woman molested a girl. They don't even think about it when they're thinking about survivors. Or they say things like, the police said to me, a woman wouldn't molest a girl. And so all of that is still there, but more people are starting to listen. And that gives me hope.
Well, the thought is abhorrent when you think about a woman molesting a girl. I
Yes.
mean, we think about women can be physically abusive, of course, but it's like this is we think of mothers and there's this, like, I don't know, it's tribalism among women. We would never do something like that. But of course, women do, and women do commit these things. And for men, that's even more abhorrent. Because it's that cognitive dissonance. It's like virtually impossible to be able to think that a woman could commit these crimes. And, I think that the Mary Kayla Tourneau case opened a lot of doors, but it opened them in a very slow process because when she was first arrested, I mean, he was like 11 and people were like, oh, that's awful. And then she, gets out of jail and gets pregnant by still molesting him. And then it goes on, and then she gets out of prison, and then they get married and they raise these kids. And now she's dead. And now Vili Falau is like coming through his own healing journey. And he hasn't done anything public recently that I've seen, but he is pretty damaged. A lot of horrible things happened to him.
Absolutely.
And I think that started a little bit of a conversation, but I will easily admit, the survivors movement, especially, you focus on your own healing. The worst abuse that ever happened is the one that happened to you. And then you reach out to a larger group and a larger group and a larger group. And it's lazy, but it's understandable why it's like, oh, well, it just got forgotten and we have to fix that. That is because it's not excusable anymore. Because there are too many survivors that need help. And I want to salute you for something, because going back, you said that you came forward and you told that school counselor that, things are happening. And this is in a time period where there wasn't a lot of education, anti-abuse education for kids. And certainly any education there would have been the man in the white panel van. What was it that gave you the strength to come forward and say something? And because you said you wanted to help other girls, but there had to be how were you able to verbalize what happened?
Well, I'm autistic, and one of my autistic things is a strong need for justice and fairness, etc. And it can be kind of black and white thinking, like, this is wrong. It doesn't matter that nobody else has said anything exactly like this. This is wrong. I need to do something. And I've also had, since the time I was little, I've had a strong drive that if something bad happens to me, I don't want it to happen to anybody else. I don't want to pass that along. I don't want to stay quiet. And I've always found it easier to speak up for other people than myself. So the only reason I told on her was to save other little girls. As soon as it occurred to me that she might be repeating that behavior, that's when I needed to tell. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't.
Do you think you were also targeted? Were you diagnosed as autistic yet when? Yeah, see, and that's another. Women are totally ignored when it comes to that kind of diagnosis. So you're fighting a double battle. But do you think that she saw that vulnerability and targeted you because of that?
Absolutely. I was a quiet kid. When I first started going to school, I didn't talk my first year in kindergarten. When I was in kinder, talked to my friends, but I wouldn't talk in class. I was scared, and I have situational mutism. And I wasn't talking to my teacher at first either, my new teacher. And I think she liked that I was quiet. I was well known in the school as like a rule follower, someone who's at the top of the class, someone who likes to help, and somebody who wanted to be a teacher. And I'm sure she heard around about me, like from other teachers. And she had seen me run to hug my first grade teacher a few days into the school year. And then she talked to my first grade teacher about me. So I'm sure she learned those kinds of things, and that made me more attractive to her. Because if a child follows rules, does what an adult tells them to, then the abuser thinks, okay, they'll listen to me when I tell them to do this. If the child is quiet, that might mean the child is less likely to speak up for themselves and more likely to stay quiet when the teacher threatens them. So I think those were characteristics that she found attractive.
So you're the rule follower, quiet kid, high achieving, and she's writing letters about you every year about these false allegations. Again, I'm absolutely blown away by that. So when you said that, she talked to other teachers, what were signs that other teachers at the school and other adults could have picked up while your abuse was going on to get ahead of it, to stop it, besides the counselor reporting to the cops?
And that was the following school year that the counselor reported. But when the school year she was abusing me, she immediately started calling me hers. Like, she'd call me my Donna, my baby girl, my sweetie, my little girl, even when she talked to other teachers about me, because I overheard her saying that. That should raise a red flag. If a teacher is talking about a child that way, they shouldn't be talking about their students that way at all. I mean, of course, my students, my kids, my fourth graders or whatever, but not like that's my little sweetie or my little girl. That should have set off so many red flags. Additionally, if she was near me, her hands were on me pretty much all the time. Like, she would be playing with my hair. She would be massaging my shoulders. She'd be coming up behind me and hugging me. She'd be tickling me. She'd pick me up. She'd pull me
and those
under
are things
her
that if a
lap.
man did, it would be an instant red flag. And I'm sorry, I cut you off, so please.
Oh, no, absolutely. I don't think a man would have gotten away with any of these behaviors. I think they would have all, the other teachers, other adults would have been like, something's wrong here. But because she was a woman, because she portrayed herself because she was a mother, she had been a stay-at-home mom, and she had groomed the community to see her as a very devoted mother, a wonderful volunteer, a loving wife, all sorts of other things. That's how people saw her. And they probably misinterpreted some of her behaviors as being motherly, because she'd also fix my clothes, like adjust my clothing and other stuff that's not appropriate for a teacher to do, unless a kid's like, hey, my zipper on my jacket is stuck. Can you help me? But that wasn't the kind of thing she was doing. She was like tucking in my shirt for me. And that's not something. She was picking lint off my skirt, which basically meant she'd be flipping it up. Those aren't things that teachers should be doing. If there's a mark on a child's clothes, you can tell the child where the mark is. Or if there's lint or something, kids don't care. So, I mean, you really don't even need to mention that unless it's like picture day and it's going to show up glaringly in pictures. But those things they would not have liked a man doing. Additionally, she spent a lot of alone time with me. She had set it up that since she was a new teacher, she needed some help with bulletin boards and things like that. And because I wanted to be a teacher, she was going to mentor me. So she got other adults in the school used to seeing me with her, getting art supplies, getting paper for bulletin boards, doing inventory for the school store, etc. So they didn't think of it when the doors started closing while she was with me in these spaces. They didn't think anything of it when she came to get me off the playground early before school started, or when she kept me later, or when she kept me in over recess, etc. She groomed them to get used to that. She groomed my classmates to get used to that, seeing her hands on me, to get used to, and my classmates would get mad at the favoritism. She would give me snacks. She would give me, soda. She would give me all kinds of things that they weren't getting. She would give me special attention. And even another thing that the other grade level teacher saw that should have been reported immediately. I broke my wrist at school. I was doing a back walkover in PE, and some boys were being, kids
Boys.
and shoving each other around, and one fell into me, and I popped my bone out of the socket. And so the next day, it was my left hand. I'm right-handed. The next day, she insisted she had to help me in the bathroom. She didn't. My parents would not have sent me to school without clothes I could easily manage with one hand, but she insisted she had to help me. And I was crying because I was so humiliated. The other grade level teacher saw her and I come out of the same bathroom stall because the teachers use the same bathroom as the kids, which should not happen either. And my teacher ran to her and said, "Oh, Donna broke her wrist and she asked me to help her." And I'm shaking my head frantically. And the other grade level teacher did nothing. Also, when I said to that grade level teacher, "I don't want to go to my classroom, my teacher scares me," she didn't ask, "Can you tell me more about that? Why don't you want to go? Why does she scare you?" I even told the other grade level teacher, "My teacher's too handsy with me and I don't like it." Nothing. But if a man had done these things, I am certain that one of the teachers would have stopped that person. My teacher would also hold me on her lap in assemblies. And my first grade teacher, when she saw that, and she saw I must have looked really uncomfortable, after the assembly, she came over to check on me. And my teacher was, Johnny on the spot right there. And my first grade teacher told me I could come talk to her anytime about anything because she's trying to leave that door open. But my teacher was already right there, like, "This is my student. I'm taking her with me. We need to get back to class," that kind of stuff. But I didn't know how to tell my first grade teacher. My dad had taught my brother and I about body safety and sexual abuse, but it was always presented because it was the time period where stranger danger was key and where abusers were always depicted as creepy older men. I had never heard of a teacher abusing a kid. I never heard of a woman abusing a girl. I did not understand what she was doing to me until she labeled it as sex.
She
And then I was
labeled
like,
it as sex.
yes, after she did a particular thing to me, she said now she understood why people enjoyed sex. That was the best sex she'd ever had. So then bulb went off in my head. Oh, she's sexually abusing me. Okay. But by then, I didn't know how to tell. I didn't have the language. I was terrified of her. I was terrified of her threats. She was physically abusive to me at times. So I did not put violence towards my dogs again past her. She also drove past my house a lot. She lived not that far away, but she'd have to go out of her way to come by my house on her way to or from school, or pretty much anywhere. But I caught her many times driving past my house. So I was pretty scared of her.
Well, she created a web that you couldn't get out of. And then when you tried to, she smeared you for the next 6 years.
And
And
sued my family and me.
she sued you?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, so what happened with that?
She sued me. Was told that her lawyers were her family members, which is so unethical. And my parents countersued. And that dragged on for a while. I was told that judges, like certain judges, tossed out the lawsuit, so she refiled with a different judge. And then I ended up having to do an all-day deposition. I was not allowed to have my parents in there. I had my lawyer, and he 100% believed me. He was on my side. He was great. But that deposition was traumatizing because her lawyers were extremely cruel and wanted me to give what I felt like was pornographic detail about incidents of abuse. So I got frustrated and said, by that point, I knew the police should have asked me about her identifying marks. So I got frustrated and I was like, she's got a scar here, she's got this. And her lawyers, one of them just blew up and told me to stop, ordered that stricken from the record. And then the deposition wrapped up quickly thereafter. My lawyer told me that he was pretty sure that lawyer, since he knew her, he recognized that she did have those scars since he was a family member. And my lawyer said she's probably going to drop the suit. So it ended up in the paper before she could do that, saying that she had sued a student of hers. My name was not used. My initials were not used. And after that, she sent through her lawyer that she had dropped the lawsuit against them, my parents, and I, if we would drop our lawsuit against her and each pay their own lawyer's fees. My parents did not want to risk me having to go through court. They had seen how ruthless she was and were afraid that if they didn't take that, she would force me to go in court. I knew she was running scared. And I wanted to, and by that point I was just mad and I wanted to tell what she did. So I was like, I don't care if I go to court. But, I was teenager at that point, and teenagers don't really understand what that's like. My parents made the best decision possible for me at the time, which was to accept that drop the lawsuit on both sides, pay lawyer fees.
So you were a teenager when this deposition happened, and there's no way to even express how horrible those depositions are. I mean, I was not deposed in my own case. I was deposed in another case. It was still awful. What they do to survivors is criminal, I believe. It is absolutely criminal. And you were a minor at the time. And
Yes.
the fact that, so did she sue you for defamation or?
Yes. She said that I was telling everybody about it, but the thing was, she was the one passing around the paper about me. She was the one who, when she came back from her paid leave of absence, when the district was investigating whatever they did, she told all of her students that she had been gone because Donna Bulatowicz lied about her and that they should let me know how they felt about that. So she encouraged them to bully me. She's the reason so many people knew. I did tell some people, obviously. I told the police, the school counselor. My classmates, they knew something had gone on that year. I mean, some of them were teasing me about being our teacher's girlfriend. But they hadn't known what to label it. And those are the reasons that so many people knew. I did tell some, but not as many as she. But she was suing us for people knowing about it.
Well, and that's someone acting out of fear, because I mean, I'm only, postulating here, but chances are she wanted to make sure that the other survivors kept their trap shut and was using you as an example.
Absolutely. I am certain of that too. I am sure she has far more victims than who spoke out. She did tell me that she had played the same games with her little sister that she did with me when she was starting to abuse me. So I'm maybe she lied to try to make it seem like this was okay, but abusers don't usually admit to sexually abusing somebody they didn't sexually abuse.
Well, and they don't come into the game as skilled as she was when she targeted you. She was already a pro. She wasn't,
Yes.
and they don't stop, and we've seen the research, and my experience in the Catholic Church, we found that these guys were, molesting kids when they were in seminary and in high school and everything else, and just went all the way up through the system, and I can't think that would be any different for someone like the woman who hurt you. Because from what you're saying, she knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew how to shut you up, shut your friends up, make sure that, you were defamed for the next 6 years, and then went ahead and sued you. That's Oh my God, Donna. You're you're amazing. You are absolutely amazing. And I
Thank
want
you.
to honor how much I respect and admire you for what you have come through, and now the work that you're doing very publicly to make sure that this horrible crime doesn't happen to other girls. And so what is the research saying? I mean, because you said there's holes in the research. Is there any research going on right now about female on female educator sexual misconduct?
Not as far as I am aware. It's sometimes included in other ones. I am doing an autoethnography about my experiences. Autoethnography is, and basically think of like a memoir or something, but it is more analytical than that. Like you do an ethnography on your own experiences and situate them within the research. And autoethnography as a methodology came about to help try and fill in some gaps in research. So I actually have two different ones I'm working on in relation to what happened with me that there isn't anything about. One has to do with bibliotherapy and how I use books to help me cope after the abuse. There's nothing like that out there either.
So
So,
tell me more about that.
okay, so there was a series of books that came out when my abuser was sexually abusing me. She got really mad that I was reading them when she found out what they were about. They were about a girl who, a seventh grade girl, so older than I was, but she was being emotionally and psychologically abused by a principal and his wife. And the woman was far more abusive, vindictive, etc., than the man. And that was what my case, my teacher was like that. I read into that series at the time. I thought that the woman teacher was sexually abusing the main character. And it just didn't explicitly say that, which it wouldn't have in books back then. So what I'm doing now is I did a whole series of interview questions that I answered for myself like I would if I was doing this research on other people. And now I am rereading the books, taking extensive notes on my experiences and thoughts, etc., rereading them as an adult. And then I'm going to write the autoethnography about how bibliotherapy helped me cope with looking at the other literature about bibliotherapy, about abusers, about whatever comes up. It's not really like you start off with your own theory, but so you're kind of trying, but you're open to what emerges from it. It's more of an iterative process than like if you're doing quantitative research where there's like this strict methodology and all that. It's more open-ended, etc. But autoethnographies are becoming more well-known and more done lately. So I'm pretty sure I can get these published, and I have ideas of which journals to try to get them published into.
That's amazing, because you're able to do something that so many survivors can't, because you are an educator and a researcher and a teacher educator. You can go so much deeper and so much more analytical in a way that people with letters behind their names understand and appreciate. And because I can jump up and down in the mountaintops, and they're like, Joelle, where's the research? I'm like, they're working on it. Whereas for you, you're making that research. What needs to happen, do you think, to really get the ball rolling for people to learn more about and to get more research going on female and female educator sexual misconduct?
There needs to be more awareness of the gaps in the literature and the fact that this occurs at all. Because as I said, it's often left out of delimitations when studies don't include it, like it didn't even occur to the researchers that this happens. And I'm talking studies published in 2024, 2022, 2025. So very recently published studies that don't even acknowledge that it's possible for women to molest girls when they include other other genders. So that's one big thing. Um, I think having some research out there will spark ideas with others, which is why I've got them, as I've talked about earlier, the meta-analysis, and I'm going to do a different type of meta-analysis after I'm done with that, to point out gaps in research. And then with my 2 autoethnographies, getting those out there and showing the need for research will spark ideas with other researchers. It would be like, for instance, my meta-analysis would be great for somebody who's going for a PhD, like say in social work or psychology or something, to look at and be like, okay, here are some gaps that I can do my dissertation on. Because you try to look for your dissertation should be creating new knowledge for your field. So it should be filling in a gap. So that would help people know what research to do. It might get more funding because then they could say, hey, this study shows that there is a need for this research. So I'm applying for this grant to conduct this research, etc.
You hearing from more survivors from women abusers?
Yes. Posting my story on, well, just a short version of my story on like some social media survivor groups would all like pretty much, I think actually every time, but I could be wrong on that. Every time I did that, I would get somebody saying, hey, I was molested by a woman when I was a little girl. I didn't know this happened to others. Or, hey, we've got this in common, you know? Or somebody, usually people are pretty excited, just like I am, when we find that, hey, there's somebody else like me. For so long, I felt alone with this.
So are there any groups right now, survivors groups out there for like particularly female survivors of female educators or anything like that? Or are you going to be starting one
I haven't been able to find one.
Huh. Maybe that's something we can
And that
work
doesn't
on.
mean they don't exist. It's just I have not been able to find one.
Yeah. So what do you tell parents? Because I do a lot of prevention education. We talk about, your body safety bubble and people don't enter your bubble without permission and blah, 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 blah. But I think we still condition our kids to be more scared of men than of women. And in not the particular curriculum I've worked with, but with other ones are like, oh, if you're scared or alone, go to a woman or go to a mom. What do you say to parents to make sure that their kids are well equipped and well armored to not be attractive to female abusers?
I think I don't know that I could say that any child would not be a target because you never know what characteristic a particular abuser is looking for, unfortunately. Um, but kids who know what boundaries are, who know that adults should respect boundaries, who aren't taught to capitulate to whatever adults want when it makes their tummy feel weird or something seems wrong. Those kids tend to be less attractive to an abuser because they're more likely to speak up. They're more likely to say something. Like if they're taught that an adult is not supposed, or anybody is not supposed to touch their body without consent, like even for, like for a handshake, high five, whatever, the person needs to ask consent if that's been modeled and taught to them. Then when an adult touches their body without consent, they're more likely to say, what are you doing? And that will probably scare an abuser. Like, oh gosh, they're speaking up. I should choose a different child. Unfortunately, it usually doesn't scare an abuser off of abusing completely, but that helps. And when parents talk about boundaries with kids, body boundaries, body safety, all of that, they can use examples with women in them. Not just if a man tried to hug you, without asking if it's okay, what would you do? Say, if a woman tried to hug you, um, or if any adult, not put a gender on it, just any adult tried to hug you without asking, or if another child tried to hug you without asking, what do you do? Consent education is so important. And adults need to be careful with their parents need to be careful, and guardians with their own children, that they're not saying one thing and modeling another, because kids will do what you do, not what you say so much of the time. So if parents teach a child, you should speak up if anybody crosses your body boundaries and then forces the child to hug and kiss relatives that they don't want to. That's teaching the child that their body boundaries don't matter. So consistency. A lot of adults find these conversations difficult, but they can be facilitated through children's books. For example, the book, Can I Give You a Squish? Or Rissy No Kissies, those two books, or My Body is for Myself, they all talk about body boundaries in a way that makes sense to kids. Like in the book, Rissy No Kissies, the little birdie doesn't like kissies and her family likes them. And she learns how to speak up and say, no, I would like this instead. But that can start the conversation. Like, is there something that she could have done or said sooner to help her parents know that she didn't like that? What should Rissy do if someone tries to give her a kiss without asking? Well, Rissy can do this, because it's often easier for children to talk about what a character can do or not do than it is to apply it to their own lives at first. And then with further readings of the book and further discussions, well, if you were Rissy, what would you do? If this happens to you, what can you do? And brainstorm different ways they can tell an adult that they feel who they feel safe with. Brainstorm who are their safe adults. All of those things will help children know not just how to recognize boundary crossings, but how to tell. And that is something I didn't have the words for. I thought I was being clearer than I was. I told my parents my teacher was too pushy. To me, I was telling them she keeps pushing past my body boundaries, because that's what I meant. And as a kid, that was what I thought they understood. They didn't understand that. They thought that she was trying to get me to talk when I wasn't ready, which makes sense because I wasn't talking. So asking questions when your kids say something that you're not quite sure the meaning of, just think of 3 words, tell me more. It doesn't have to be said like that, but, well, what do you mean she's too pushy? And then maybe I would have been able to say, and maybe I wouldn't have, when she touched my hand, I pulled away, and then she touched my cheek. And I don't like that. Or it could be like if your child says, I don't want to go to school today, it could be because there's bullying. It could be because they didn't study for a test, or they're worried about something else, but it also could be that their teacher is hurting them. And if you ask those questions, tell me more about this. Why do you feel this way? What's an example of this? They will be able to tell you more, hopefully. So asking those questions, and always, as to the best of your ability, showing interest in your child. Like when they're talking to you, when they're telling you something that's important to them, put down the phone. Don't scroll. Put down the phone, eyes on your child, or whatever they find comfortable. If they are telling you about something, it's a big deal to them, even if it doesn't seem like a big deal to you. So if they tell you that Johnny cut in line in front of them that day and they're mad at Johnny, that's a big deal to them because they wanted to be at that place in line and somebody took it from them. If you listen with those things, they're more likely to come to you with bigger things. So that open communication is essential too.
What do you want to say to educators and teacher educators, especially those, training, people who are coming into the field? What do you want to say to them about what they can do to identify and prevent sexual misconduct by female educators?
Well, first of all, They need to realize that any gender can abuse a child and any gender can be abused. That is key, because if someone doesn't realize that, they're not going to notice the behaviors that are concerning. They also, every educator preparation program or EPP and every school needs to have training on sexual abuse education, intervention, and prevention. Because if they don't have that training, they won't know what to look for. I started writing about like grooming behaviors shortly into my healing journey on my social media. And I had teacher friends who hadn't known any of that. Some of them have been teaching for quite a while, and they hadn't known what to recognize. And because of that list, a couple of them private messaged me and said, "Oh my gosh, my colleague is doing that with a child." And then they went to the principal, investigation happened, and thank goodness, and sure enough, it found out something was happening. But they're great, they're my friends, they're great people, they're great teachers, but they didn't know what to look for. It's usually not taught in educator preparation programs of like what a mandatory reporter means, other than just, if you suspect abuse, you need to report it. That's usually the extent of it. So, well, pre-service teachers are left with, well, what does that mean? What does it look like? What are the steps I take? Do I document things? What am I supposed to look for exactly? And what if it's my colleague who I really like? What if it's my principal who has power over me and they could fire me, etc.? They don't know what to do in those situations because nobody has given them the tools. Nobody has practiced with them how to do this. In my opinion, within any sexual abuse training, and I have created and given my own for pre-service teachers and current teachers, administrators, school counselors, etc., there needs to be practice. So here's a scenario. What do you notice in this scenario? And what are ways you could intervene? And give them time to practice it, like in small groups or something, and then talk about it as a group. Make sure the scenarios include women harming boys, harming girls. Make sure the scenarios include victims of all genders and abusers of all genders, so that they start internalizing that you can't just tell from looking at any person whether or not they can, will, or have sexually abused a child. Many teachers who are abusers are popular. They're gregarious. They have good teaching skills. They make sure they stand out in their field. They're the ones who are there late. They get Teacher of the Year. They get all these awards. They get all this recognition. They make sure they get in the paper for things because that helps them get away with it. Now, most teachers are not going to harm children, but any child harmed is one child too many. All children deserve to have safe schools, and every adult in that school needs to take steps to keep them safer. Have lines of sight in your classroom open. I know that teachers love to have, because it's a teacher, I know that we love to have like little corners, like a reading nook, etc. But build that space with a low bookshelf that anybody can see over. You don't need to have a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf to curtain off your reading space, because that provides a place where something could happen. Remove that opportunity, and you make it harder for things to happen. Schools should not have teachers using the bathroom with kids. That's not appropriate. And there's too many ways something can happen in there that should not happen. So have separate teacher facilities. If there are windows in the doors, they should remain uncovered unless it's a lockdown drill or, God forbid, a lockdown. Those windows should be uncovered. If somebody has paper covering their window, that's concerning. Why? And sometimes it's just that their students get distracted by people walking by, but that still needs to be something that that can't happen. Like, that covering needs to come down. They should not be alone with a child. If you've got one child in your classroom, because maybe the child wants to talk to you about something, stay in line of sight of the door, the open door. That's to protect the teacher too. And schools, there's so many different things schools could do, having cameras in hallways, etc., but those require more money. However, rearranging the classroom to make sure there's clear lines of sight is free. Making sure there's no covering on the doors is free. These can be implemented tomorrow. And they can help make the school a safer place for kids. Additionally, there's more child-on-child sexual abuse happening in schools too. So getting rid of those areas where somebody could be alone with someone else and be unseen helps prevent that as well. Having body safety lessons for kids that are spiraling and build on each year. So, for instance, kindergarten can learn before you hug somebody, ask. That's a great body safety lesson for kindergartners. And first grade, it can be built on more, second grade, etc., all up through high school. There are some curricula out there that do this pretty well, and there are others that could be improved. All the curricula need to include that any gender can abuse and any gender can be abused, so that they understand that, along with ways to tell. I wrote a picture book recently, and revised and revised and revised. And it's the book that would have helped me. It would have helped me know what my teacher was doing before she did it. And it's also, I think it's a great story. I'm in love with my book. And so are some other people
Is it published?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
I need to work on that.
I will put it in the show notes as soon as it's published.
Thank you. But I mean, like, I've had some others who know a ton about children's literature who've told me they're in love with my book. And it's a book of my heart, but it teaches in a non-didactic way. So not preaching at kids, but just sneaking it in a good storyline, ways to recognize grooming and how to tell. And also teaches kids that they have power and that they have allies, and there are people who care about them and will listen to them. I know this is a gap in children's books. I know of one other kid's book that teaches about grooming in a storyline, and that is Diane Tarantini's book, The Brave Knight. That's for older kids than my book is. So hers helps fill in a gap, and mine helps fill in a gap. Also, there's a middle grades book that I'm really excited about that just was published last month called Listen to the Girls by Crystal D. Giles. Her book is the only middle grades book I have read or heard of that includes teacher sexual harassment. The main character, Callette, is having a last day of school that's very different than what she thought when her favorite teacher is gone in the middle of the day. And she and her classmates find out that some girls at his other school have accused him of sexual harassment. And they hear a lot of people denigrating the girls, putting them down. So Cal and her friends try to remind people they need to listen to the girls. And as they are learning more about this, one of that group of friends realizes that some things happened to them. So it's an incredibly powerful book. It teaches kids how to recognize educator sexual abuse, the fact that this even happens, which is usually not a conversation, and it tells them how to tell. I'm so excited about this book. I wrote the author.
Well, I'll include it in the show notes. So
I have told some of my friends who are chairing book award committees that they need to read this book for consideration for their award. Because it's so amazing. I think it needs to be in every upper elementary and middle school library, every public library, etc., because kids need to know. This book will save some kids. And sorry, I'm getting emotional. If I had this book, I could have handed it to my parents or to someone else and say, this is happening to me. It will save kids. And that author is now one of my favorite people because she saw a need and she is filling that gap and she is saving kids. So, and a couple years ago, I drafted a middle grades book about educator sexual abuse, and I am going to be revising that and hopefully publishing that as well because these gaps need to be filled.
So we've covered a lot in the past hour. Is there anything that I'm missing? Is there something that the listeners really need to know?
I think more people need to know to trust their instincts. If something feels off about a child's behavior, about what a child is saying, about the way an adult is acting with a child, listen to that. Because that is something that I hear from teachers once they learn, for instance, about the grooming signs, about possible signs of sexual abuse. I had a bad feeling about that, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I was making things up because if you don't know something exists, you don't know what to do with it. You don't know how to handle it. You don't know to listen to it. It might not mean anything is happening, but it could. So if something strikes you as off, take a look at that, see what's happening, investigate further. You could be saving a kid.
So if people want to get in contact with you, there's of course the NC Sesame site, and it's my hope that female survivors of female educator abuse are going to come to you and you're going to get all these people for your research work. What's the best way to get in contact with you?
My email, which is donnabulatowicz@gmail.com.
Spell
Which
Bulatowicz for everyone.
It's DONNA, B as in boy, ULA, T as in Thomas, OWIC as in cat, Z as in zebra @gmail.com.
Great. Yeah. And I encourage anyone who has questions or concerns or just wants to learn more about Donna's research, which is so important. And your autoethnographies sound absolutely fascinating. And I can't wait to see those when they're done. Donna, you are an amazing woman and an amazing educator and an amazing researcher. And what you have done with the challenges you have faced is going to save a lot of kids. And I want to say thank you for that. The gift that you are giving back in the world is just absolutely astounding. And you are making a real difference.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
It was my pleasure. This was my interview with Donna Bulatowicz. And if you enjoyed this interview or enjoyed other conversations we've had, feel free to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or anywhere that you stream your content. On behalf of NC Sesame, I want to thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.